Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission, as always, is to give you the ultimate shortcut to being well-informed by taking on complex source material and really giving it a rigorous, impartial examination.
And today, we are opening a file that is, it's just one of the most controversial texts of the late 20th century. We're talking about Whitley Strieber's Communion.
A book that had a massive cultural impact.
Huge. It wasn't just a bestseller. It completely polarized people. You had The Nation, not exactly a publication known for, reviewing alien books, calling it potentially the most important book of the year, of the decade, of the century.
That is just immense praise, and our goal today is really clear. We are setting aside the big unanswerable question of, do aliens exist?
Right.
Instead, we're going to synthesize the profound personal trauma, the intense scientific scrutiny that Strieber put himself through, and the philosophical questions that came out of it. We're treating this as a documented case of extreme human experience.
Exactly. We're looking at the source material to understand the mechanism of denial, this desperate search for proof, and what happens to a person psychologically when their reality is just shattered. We want to understand what happened to Whitley Strieber.
And it all kicks off in the winter of 1985. We have to start there, at the core incident.
Yeah.
December 26, 1985. Strieber's at his cabin. It's secluded, upstate New York. He goes to bed.
And 6 hours later, he wakes up. But he doesn't just wake up, he snaps awake. And in his own words, he knew instantly that he was forever changed.
And the terrifying part was he had no idea why.
Not a clue. Just this overwhelming sense that something fundamental had shifted.
Okay, let's get into this.
So establishing Strieber's mindset before this whole thing is, I think, absolutely critical.
Yeah, who was this guy before December 85?
He was the consummate skeptic, a cynic even when it came to stuff like UFOs. He called it a false unknown, a distraction from the real problem.
Right. He wasn't some new age guy looking for answers in the stars.
Not at all. He had just written War Day, a novel about the aftermath of a nuclear war. His mind was on, concrete, imminent global disaster. He was grounded in grim, real-world probabilities.
So this was not a case of someone wanting this to happen. This was a man focused on physics and politics who was suddenly hit with something he thought was, frankly, delusional.
And when he woke up on that morning, the symptoms were immediate and they were physical.
And profoundly confusing.
The physical decline was just startlingly fast. He describes this intense, crippling fatigue. He'd just been cross-country skiing, light activity, and suddenly he feels like he's been hit by a truck.
And the chills.
Bone-deep chills, shaking uncontrollably. He was sure he was getting a severe flu, but the really peculiar thing was his temperature.
What about it?
Well, he kept taking it during these fever bouts, right? And it never went into a fever range. It just hovered between, say, 96.6 and 98.8 Fahrenheit.
So his body is screaming, I'm sick, but the thermometer says, you're fine.
Exactly. That physiological mismatch is the first big red flag that this isn't a normal illness.
And there's other physical stuff too, right? Localized, unexplained pain.
Yes, this persistent, really uncomfortable rectal pain. No memory of an injury, nothing to explain it, but the pain was sharp and it was undeniable.
So you got the body reacting, and then you have the mind reacting, but not quite connecting the dots.
Right. He's getting these strange, intrusive recollections, little flashes of being grabbed or pulled, hearing muffled running sounds. His body and mind are both screaming that there's been some kind of intense recent violation, but his conscious mind has just walled it off completely.
This is what drives him to get help. He's not trying to prove a story. He's trying to figure out what's wrong with him.
And he was rigorous about it. He knew that for anyone, including himself, to take this seriously, he had to rule out the conventional psychological explanations first.
So what did that look like?
It was extensive. He went through interviews and testing with 3 different psychologists and 3 different psychiatrists, neurological screening, the whole deal.
And the conclusion?
Consistent across the board. He fell within the normal range in all respects. No psychosis, no schizophrenia, no evidence of delusional thinking. He was, by all clinical measures, sane.
Okay, so he's sane, but that doesn't mean the event was external. It could still be a powerful internal psychological event.
Which is why he went one step further. He opted for a polygraph test, a lie detector.
Now, this is a big deal because he's not just testing his sanity, he's testing his sincerity.
That's the perfect way to put it. It wasn't about proving aliens are real. It was about proving that he believed it was real, that he wasn't making it up.
And he didn't go to just anyone.
No, he found an operator with 30 years of experience, a real veteran, and Strieber passed the polygraph without qualification.
Okay, let's pause on that, because what does passing a polygraph actually prove in a case like this? I mean, it's not a truth machine.
That's a critical question. A polygraph doesn't measure truth, you're right. It measures physiological stress associated with deception. So what it proved, definitively, is that Whitley Strieber believed that the events he was describing, as bizarre as they were, happened exactly as he said.
So it confirms the intense subjective reality of the experience.
Which is the powerful psychological fact in itself, even if it doesn't tell us what the source was.
So now we have a sane man who sincerely believes a traumatic event happened, but he can't access the memory. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating parts of the book, the screen memory.
The Freudian idea of a screen memory, it's the mind's bodyguard, really. It creates a substitute memory, something less threatening, more plausible, to shield the conscious mind from the real, overwhelming trauma.
His brain was basically supplying him with rational explanations for this feeling of absolute terror.
Exactly. And he had two main ones that he just clung to, desperately.
The first one was the owl.
He was totally convinced that he'd been terrified by a barn owl staring through the bedroom window. He described its huge eyes, the sharp turn of its head. He told his wife, his friends, everyone.
But reality intruded.
Pretty quickly. He went outside and there were just no tracks in the snow. Nothing. For a bird that large to land near the window, there would have had to be some kind of disturbance. The physical evidence wasn't there.
And the second screen memory.
The phantom snowmobile. He tried to rationalize it as a snowmobile light in the woods between his cabin and the neighbor's place.
Which also got debunked.
Immediately. His neighbors told him, look, the woods are too dense, it's too rocky, there's way too much unplowed snow. There's just no way a snowmobile could get through there, let alone shine a direct beam into the cabin.
What's so incredible is how the mind chooses these plausible substitutes. An animal, a prowler, things that could be scary, but are at least things we can categorize.
The mind prefers a familiar threat. It was realizing that his substitute memories were completely hollow and that crushing emotional pain underneath it all that finally pushed him towards hypnosis. He was forced to confront the idea that the real event was much, much stranger than an owl.
And that decision to try hypnosis was a really difficult one for him, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He knew the science. He was well aware of studies showing that you could pretty easily induce a subject to recall a detailed UFO abduction just through suggestion.
And given what he wrote about, global disaster and all that, he was worried his own mind might invent these visitors as a way to, I don't know, solve humanity's problems.
Exactly. So his choice of hypnotist became a question of intellectual integrity. He couldn't go to someone in the UFO community.
He needed someone completely neutral.
And he found one. Dr. Donald F. Klein, the director of research at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. A highly prestigious, skeptical, and totally unconnected clinician.
He was basically trying to minimize any chance of suggestion, even though he still had his own doubts about how reliable any of this could be.
He was trying to be his own harshest critic.
So, under Dr. Klein's guidance, the memories of December 26 start to surface. And they are incredibly traumatic. Let's start with the figure he saw in the bedroom.
He recalled this very small figure, maybe 3.5 feet tall. He even compared it to the size of his own young son.
What did it look like?
It was wearing a kind of smooth, rounded hat, and on its chest was a square plate with concentric circles etched into it, like a breastplate. He really struggled to see the face. Just remember 2 dark holes for eyes and a little downturned line for a mouth.
And the feeling it generated.
Immediate, overwhelming fear, primal fear.
And then came the abduction itself, the movement.
This is one of the strangest parts. He described a feeling of total, absolute paralysis. He was completely stiff. But what was truly terrifying was the loss of sensation. He couldn't feel touch or warmth or cold as he was being moved.
So he's aware, but his body has just been switched off.
It's like his consciousness was just a passenger in a body that could no longer interact with the world through feeling. A complete loss of physical autonomy.
He's taken to some kind of room. What did he recall about the environment?
A gray or maybe tan room. He was put on a bench, feeling utterly helpless, and he was surrounded by these small beings moving with this quick, mechanical, jerky way that he found deeply ugly.
And his own consciousness started to break down.
Yeah, he felt like his complex, analytical human mind had been reduced to just a raw biological response. He couldn't rationalize, he couldn't filter his emotions. He was just locked in this terrifying state of pure, unfiltered danger.
Which makes the medical procedures they performed on him even more horrific. Let's detail those, starting with the one involving his head.
The cranial intrusion. He was shown this tiny gray box. It opened, and inside was this incredibly shiny, hair-thin needle.
Wow.
And he just knew it was for his head. And in this moment of sheer terror, he actually pleaded with the being. He tried to reason with it.
What did he say?
He said, "You'll ruin a beautiful mind." He was trying to assert his humanity, his intellectual worth. But it didn't matter. The procedure happened anyway. He remembered a bang and a flash.
A bang and a flash, like a high-energy discharge.
Exactly. And then he just felt himself collapse into what he called a cradle of tiny arms.
The second procedure, the rectal one, is probably the most famous and, the most violating part of the whole book.
This was the moment of complete violation for him. It's when he felt conscious, white-hot anger for the first time. Two stocky beings pulled his legs apart. They showed him the instrument.
And his description of it is incredibly precise.
Chillingly precise. An enormous and extremely ugly object, gray and scaly, with a sort of network of wires on the end. He said it was narrow, triangular, and at least a foot long.
My God.
The feeling of it being inserted was so traumatic that he used the word raped to describe it. He speculated later that it was maybe for collecting complex biological samples, gut biome, fecal matter, something like that.
What's really striking here is that he didn't just see one type of creature, it was a whole cast of them.
That's a key point. This wasn't one alien species. He identified 4 distinct types. You had the small, almost robot-like guides. Then you had the group of short, stocky beings in dark blue coveralls. They were the ones doing the rough procedures.
And the grays.
Yeah, there were smaller, huddled figures with these round, black, button-like eyes that he nicknamed the Greys. But they seemed almost subservient, like assistants.
And then there's the fourth type, the one that became the image of the entire phenomenon.
The one on the cover of the book. The 5-foot-tall, slender being, bald, much taller than the others, and it had what he called extremely prominent and mesmerizing black slanted eyes. The mouth and nose were almost vestigial, just tiny features.
And this one seemed different.
It seemed to have a greater intelligence, a greater sense of purpose. It was this being that he would have more direct communication with later. The diversity suggests a whole operation, specialization, a hierarchy, different roles.
It's that combination of the deep trauma, the mechanical precision of the procedures, and this sudden total loss of self that convinced him this was not a dream.
It felt intensely physical. It felt real.
So the December 26th event was, by its nature, very personal. It was just Strieber and his wife in the cabin.
Right, and she was asleep through the whole thing, or so it seemed.
But the incident on October 4th of that same year, 1985, that's where we get the critical external validation, because they had house guests.
This is the crucial corroboration. Initially, his memory of that night was almost nothing. He remembered an explosion, a sound, a vague fear. The roof was on fire, but that was it.
But under hypnosis, it all came flooding back, starting with a light.
A very distinct blue light creeping up the ceiling. His first thought, his rational mind kicking in, was that the chimney was on fire.
But his reaction was completely wrong.
Totally wrong. His heart was hammering with panic, but instead of jumping up to check on the fire, he just inexplicably fell into this deep, forced sleep. His body was completely subdued.
And under hypnosis, he saw why. The slender being was there,
standing over him. And it used a specific device on him. A silver-tipped, ruler-like wand. It touched his forehead.
And the effect wasn't physical. It was informational.
It was a data dump. He was flooded with these terrifying mental images of global nuclear destruction, the world blowing up in red fire, the atmosphere choked with white smoke.
Which is directly linked to the anxieties he'd been exploring in his book, War Day.
Exactly. And a voice in his mind said, "That's your home. You know why this will happen." It's like the entity was either reading his deepest fears or using them as a kind of language to communicate this warning about humanity's self-destructive path.
And the bang, the explosion that everyone heard. What did he remember causing that?
He saw the being strike a small, needle-like object in the air, and it created a big bang pow that left a strong tingling sensation on his face. This was the physical event that everyone could witness.
Which brings us to the house guests, Jacques Angelescu and Annie Gottlieb. Their testimony is central. Let's start with Jacques.
Jacques is a fantastic witness, a very grounded, physical guy, a writer who had survived Soviet slave labor camps. He was not someone prone to fantasy.
And he woke up to the explosion.
He woke up to the explosion and, crucially, a massive, unexplainable burst of light.
How bright are we talking?
So bright that he said for several seconds it made the dense fog outside completely vanish and made it feel like mid-morning inside the cabin.
Which experts later said was Unlikely.
Highly unlikely. There were no floodlights nearby, the moon was low, and fog diffuses light. It doesn't amplify it like that. So Jacques' testimony is undeniable proof of a massive, unexplained energy discharge right there.
And Annie Gottlieb's testimony is maybe even more direct, more bizarre.
Annie also woke up to the bang, but right after, she heard something very specific, a scurry of little feet running across your bedroom upstairs.
Her first thought was it was the cats.
But then Strieber realized the chilling part. Their cats weren't at the cabin, they were back in the city. The sound of multiple, tiny, fast-moving footsteps was a shared physical perception.
And her memory of what Strieber said the next morning is pretty damning, too.
Oh, yeah. She recalled Strieber, who was consciously trying to rationalize everything, offering this completely bizarre explanation. She remembered him saying something like, some people had come down from a spaceship to visit.
Which he consciously denied ever saying.
Vehemently. But the fact that he offered some kind of strange, non-rational explanation for the night's events to a witness suggests that the memory of what really happened was right there, just below the surface.
So this convergence, the band, the light, the scurry of feet, it validates the event as something physical, external, that happened in real space and time.
And it wasn't just the adults. The effect on his son suggests a shared experience as well.
The son's dream.
It was completely spontaneous. He told his dad he dreamed that a bunch of little doctors took me out on the porch and put me on a cot. And they kept telling him in his head, we won't hurt you.
I mean, that mirrors classic abduction tropes.
Exactly. Tropes that this child had absolutely zero exposure to. It just raises this chilling question of whether the experience is somehow transmittable or if the child had his own direct encounter.
As Strieber started to piece all this together, he realized these weren't just two isolated incidents in 1985.
No, they were the culmination of a lifelong pattern of fear, of avoidance, of flight, a pattern that started long before he had any conscious memory of UFOs.
You can see the psychological state was there before the conscious recall.
Absolutely. He was plagued by this increasing nervousness, terrible dreams, a constant feeling of being watched. He developed these strange, secret habits.
Like what?
Compulsively searching under beds, checking closets. He had this unreasonable fear of prowlers, but he was always looking for something small and quick.
And this fear manifested in what he called the running syndrome, this constant need to move.
He called himself a refugee in my own life. The pattern started back in 1978. They were in a New York City apartment and were driven out by a scary incident. A prowler on the roof, menacing silent phone calls. They just fled.
To cause cop. And then it happened again.
1979. He wakes up one night with this terrifying but totally inexplicable impression of people pouring in through the windows. So they packed up and moved again, right back to the city.
And the incident in 1980 is maybe the most violent.
They'd moved again. One night, after seeing a strange streak of light, they wake up to their son crying. Strieber looks around and sees a small, dark figure dart towards the balcony. A few moments later, a terrific explosion.
The seltzer bottle.
A siphon of seltzer just sitting on a table had exploded so violently the thick glass was basically turned to dust. It was a seemingly random, destructive event that just triggered their flight response again. Within weeks, they had moved.
And to cope with all this, the stress, the cost of moving, his mind just created these elaborate stories to justify it all.
Yeah, these rational screen memories. He convinced himself he was being stalked by a dangerous guy from college. He even made up a whole story about spending 6 weeks in Florence, a completely fictitious memory, just to explain away one period of intense, unacknowledged fear.
The real driver was this fear of the unknown, and it made him a fugitive.
And the pattern goes back even further, back to his childhood.
The incident on the train, the Texas Eagle in 1957.
As a boy, coming home from camp, he gets violently ill on the train, just vomiting bile for hours. Under hypnosis, this illness was linked to an abduction. He remembered seeing his own father, terrified and helpless, while he was forced to ingest something bitter. He described it as a bladder being pushed down his throat. The illness was the body's reaction.
And during that train memory, he asked about other people he saw who he thought were soldiers.
And the response he got was just chillingly methodical. He asked who they were, and the beings just replied, because they were alone.
Suggesting a targeting criteria.
A systematic process. They were targeting isolated individuals. It wasn't random.
And then there's the story from 1958, the anti-gravity machine.
Yeah, a skeptical friend brought this up years later. He remembered that as a kid, Whitley claimed spacemen had taught him how to build an anti-gravity machine.
And when he plugged it in,
Electrical chaos. Lights in the house pulsating, bulbs blowing out. The next day, the roof over his bedroom mysteriously catches on fire. Even as a child, Strieber feared it was the spacemen, angry that he tried to copy their tech. It's just this lifelong pattern of fear, strange technology, and unexplainable physical events.
So once he's established this pattern, this lifelong reality,
Hmm.
he has to try and find a conventional scientific explanation for it all.
Right. And the number one suspect, the one the medical community was really talking about at the time, was temporal lobe abnormality, specifically temporal lobe epilepsy, TLE.
And on the surface, the TLE hypothesis fits the symptoms pretty well. Right?
It maps on almost perfectly. TLE is about abnormal electrical activity in the temporal lobe. That's the part of the brain that handles sensory input, memory, emotion.
So what are the symptoms?
Profound panic attacks, intense philosophical or cosmic preoccupations, strong smells that aren't there. He reported smelling smoldering cardboard, and these incredibly vivid, detailed, almost spiritual hallucinations or journeys. Dr. Klein himself initially thought this was a strong possibility.
This is where the physical procedures he remembered, especially the nasal intrusion, become neurologically significant.
Terrifyingly so. The olfactory nerve is a direct pathway deep into the temporal lobe. And when Strieber asked other UFO researchers to check their cases, they found this chilling consistency.
How was it?
Multiple reports from abductees of physical intrusions into or behind the ear, or most commonly, up the nose.
And Strieber himself had a memory of that happening.
He did. Weeks after his first recall, he remembered something like a needle being jabbed violently up his nose right into that region. So the question becomes, were the visitors causing TLE-like symptoms by stimulating this area, or were they just exploiting a known neural pathway?
So to figure this out, he needed a definitive neurological test.
He needed an EEG, and he underwent 2 separate, extensive EEG tests, including the highly invasive procedure of inserting electrodes deep into his nasal cavity.
Right into the area he remembered the probe going.
The exact spot. And both neurologists came to the same conclusion. Absolutely normal temporal lobe function, no TLE, no neurological disorder, nothing.
So conventional science fails to explain the hardware, the brain. So Strieber has to start looking at the software, the phenomenon itself. This leads him to his hive mind hypothesis.
The thing that drove this idea was their movement. They moved stiffly with this weird mechanical choreography. It was like they didn't have individual will.
So he thought they might be a single consciousness in many bodies.
Like a colony of ants or bees, but with incredibly high intelligence. A single, decentralized consciousness.
And if that's true, what does it mean when they encounter a single autonomous human?
It's a huge problem for them. If the hive mind thinks slowly, deliberately, with a centralized logic, then a fast-thinking, unpredictable human with individual consciousness could be seen as a remarkable threat.
So the abductions, the paralysis, it's a form of threat containment.
That's the theory. It would explain the total loss of self, the paralysis, the intrusive procedures. The hive needs to contain the threat of human freedom. The individual members seem non-formidable because they are non-formidable. They lack a strong sense of self. Their goal is to reduce the powerful human consciousness down to that raw biological response so they can safely interact with it.
As Strieber is going through all of this, he has to integrate it into his marriage. And his wife, Anne, had her own unacknowledged role to play.
Her hypnosis was fascinating. It revealed these huge memory blanks for the nights of October 4th and December 26th. Deep amnesia.
But she still had a sense of purpose during it all.
A very strong one. She felt that Whitley was supposed to go and that her specific role was to help him afterwards to deal with it, not to interfere, not to stop them.
So she was like a pre-programmed support system.
It seems that way. Her role was facilitation and aftercare. And her memories also provided this incredible emotional validation for him. She remembered hearing him scream on October 4th, a sound she knew wasn't their son. She recalled thinking, it's frightening to see a man scream because men don't scream.
Confirming the absolute terror that he'd been trying to suppress.
Exactly. And then she provided this other, almost external piece of the puzzle.
The title of the book.
Yeah. Weeks after her hypnosis, she started speaking in her sleep. But it wasn't her voice. It was this deep, resonant, basso profundo voice. A booming male voice. And it dictated the title. It said the book should be called Communion, because that's what it's about.
Wow. And Strieber recognized the voice.
He had heard it before during his own experiences. It's like the phenomenon itself was naming the experience, framing it as a sacred sharing, a relationship, not just a cold experiment.
And he soon found out he wasn't alone. He joined a support group, a colloquy of other experiencers he called the Hidden Choir.
And in that group, he found that his deepest, most paranoid anxieties were actually universal among them.
What were the common threads?
Three things really stood out. First, this ubiquitous feeling of continuous monitoring, the sense that you're never really alone, you're always being watched. Second, this shared anxiety of being used, even if the purpose might be benign.
And the third one mirrored his own life.
The running, a pronounced shared pattern of constant geographical flight. People making urgent, inexplicable moves across the country, just desperately trying to escape the experience. The relief of finding out he wasn't the only one doing this was immense for him.
And this brings us to the final piece he explored, the symbolism, the triad symbolism. This is where we move out of science and into a more philosophical space.
The number 3 and the triangular shape just kept recurring, profoundly and consistently, not just for him, but for others in the group. Visitors appeared in threes, they projected triangular lights, triangular devices were etched onto his arm and the body of another abductee.
And the number 3 has this deep, ancient significance.
He connected it to everything from the Holy Trinity in Christianity to the philosophies of Gurdjieff, who taught that the universe is governed by 3 forces: affirmation, negation, and the third force, reconciliation.
So the triangle isn't just a shape, it's a structural logic.
That's exactly it. He started to hypothesize that the triangular imagery might represent a potential shared aim between humanity and the visitors.
A third force emerging from 2 opposites.
Right. If you have humanity individual fast consciousness as one point and the visitors collective slow consciousness as the second, then the interaction itself, the communion, is meant to generate a third transformative force. He saw it as a symbol of an alliance, a striving for a necessary marriage of 2 completely different kinds of intelligence.
It's an interpretation that transforms the trauma into this terrifying but ultimately creative relationship.
It forces you to look at the horror not as random cruelty, but as a necessary pressurized interaction driven by an alien logic that might ultimately have a shared purpose with our own.
So this whole deep dive has really laid bare this uncomfortable tension at the heart of communion. You have the objective reality on one side, the failed medical diagnosis, the past polygraph, the witness corroboration.
And on the other side, you have the profoundly bizarre content of the memories themselves. The screen memories, the violation, the hive mind theory, the deep symbolic structures. It's almost impossible to reconcile the two.
And Strieber's final position wasn't one of certainty, was it?
Not at all. It was one of radical honesty. He concluded that the experiences were real in the sense that he lived them. They caused physical symptoms, they were witnessed. But the source remains an enigma. Are they extraterrestrial? Are they some natural phenomenon we don't understand that interacts with the brain? Or are they maybe some latent, unacknowledged part of the human species itself?
He realized that no matter where it comes from, the phenomenon demands action from us. And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the learner.
During his experiences, Strieber received these specific informational bursts. The terrifying visions of nuclear war were coupled with environmental predictions. Specifically, he was warned about the ozone hole over the Arctic, leading to a reduction in our immune systems, and an increase in volcanic activity following strange atmospheric shifts.
And these predictions, delivered through this completely bizarre channel, still demand a practical response.
You can't verify the source, but you can't ignore the urgency of the message. And Strieber realized that's the point. We have to stop waiting for the visitors to save us or to give us a neat, tidy explanation.
So the central message of communion is what?
That the encounter, whatever its nature, forces us to confront our own fragility and our own self-destructive tendencies. The challenge is to embrace this radical uncertainty, to embrace the need for self-transformation right now, because the future of our world and our ability to deal with the unknown depends entirely on the choices we make.
A deeply unsettling and maybe essential look into the enigma of the self and the universe. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.